Alright, so we've got this Game Boy Advance here next to this backlit Game Boy Advance system. And just taking a quick look, you can see how much better the ability to see the screen is, and can't even play the Game Boy on the left in the dark. So, this is a full screen backlight. It has the brightness settings here and very vibrant colors. The best part is it requires no trimming of the shell and just one solder point, and that's it. And you can put it together very quickly. So let's get started. So to begin, we have this tri-wing screwdriver, and you unscrew those 6 holes right there. And you also have this Phillips head, and you unscrew right there. Once we do that, we take the shell right off to reveal the insides. Just go ahead and pull off the L&R triggers and then the side bits right there. And then the next thing that you're going to do is unscrew with your Phillips head here with these 3 screws. Next, let's get rid of this power switch here and lift up these bells here to detach the ribbon cable from the motherboard. Got that silicone membrane stuck to it. Let's take out all of the buttons here, get the Game Boy all disassembled. And here's how to take the screen out. You twist it a little bit like an ice tray, then lift it up and pry it open using your thumbnail as leverage. And now let's go ahead and take out the lens here because we have a glass one that's much nicer to replace it. So what you do is find a corner and just press, and it should come out pretty easily. So now it's time to bring out the mod kit from vetrogaming.com. Yeah, see, that's a glass thing right there. So before we put it together, let's test it by putting in the ribbon cable and clamping it down, making sure the ribbon cable that's in the PCB board fits the Game Boy Advance, and then lock the PCB board down. The ribbon cable is either a 32 or a 40 pin. Just make sure that you're using the one that fits your Game Boy Advance, and then close those bails down to make sure that they are locked into place, and then strip the wire. You can do it with your fingernail, but if you want to, you could use wire cutters as well. And what we're going to do is solder the wire down to the fuse here on the right side. And the reason we're testing this is in the case that something is defective, we can still return it for a refund. So let's clean the flux residue off before we give it a quick test. And by the way, the things that I'm using in this video, I'll link them in the description. So now that everything is put together, let's give it a quick test here to make sure that the parts are functioning correctly. And what do you know? Looks pretty good to me. The brightness sensor works as well, so I would say this thing is good to go ahead and confidently complete the installation. So in order to do that, we have this adhesive gasket here to go ahead and put into the Game Boy shell. Go ahead and peel off the side that goes into the Game Boy shell first, and then line it up inside of the shell, making sure that there's no adhesive that hangs over on the other side. And there we go. So now I'm gonna use some tweezers here to just pry open the top layer. This is where the LCD will lay and stick to make sure it doesn't move out of place. So now let's flip this thing over and grab our glass lens here and peel off the adhesive, peel off this other part as well, and lay it right down into the Game Boy shell. And put in these very small clear acrylic spacers here. This will help align the display. Following that, let's go ahead and get a little bit of low-tack tape to just make sure there's no dust particles. You can also use some compressed air, blow on it, try not to spit on the screen, that'd be kind of nasty. Or touch your fingers on it, that can be difficult to get off as well. But basically just want to make sure there's no dust as much as possible, and go ahead and lay the LCD screen and push it to the far right bottom corner, and that should be perfectly aligned. And then the following step is to attach the LCD to the PCB board by folding down that flap just like I showed earlier. It'd also be a good idea to add some capped-on tape to prevent shorts. If you don't have that, a piece of paper acts as insulation as well. And you can also use the film that was on the LCD screen as insulation between the PCB and the back of the LCD. So really what I'm doing now is pushing down the bells to attach the ribbon cable and to fully assemble the Game Boy with the new LCD screen. So like we already did, let's go ahead and attach the ribbon cable to the PCB board and folding the flap down to make sure it is locked into place. And let's actually, before we assemble the Game Boy the rest of the way, let's just look at it, test it, and make sure it functions with the installation. That looks good to me. So with that, you know the rest. Go ahead and assemble the Game Boy back together. Make sure to fold the brightness sensor to where it is facing the N on the Nintendo logo in the front. And then put the buttons, membranes, LNR triggers, and all the screws back together on the Game Boy. Let's just be careful that when we put the Game Boy back together that we don't crush the wire here. So once you reassemble the Game Boy, go ahead and slap some batteries in, and here you have a beautiful backlit Game Boy Advance. I appreciate you watching this video. If you want to buy the kit or a pre-built Game Boy, just go to vetrogaming.com.